Joining us now here on the Flagship Podcast preview, we are looking ahead to Rice, and we're doing it with Matthew Bartlett, who runs at theroost.com. I think they just call it The Roost, but he is the foremost expert on Rice football. And of course, the Longhorns and the Rice Owls will tee it up at 7 o'clock on Saturday night on the Longhorn Network. Matthew, thanks so much for joining us. How you doing?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me and getting our tour of the Southwest Conference of old, right?
Yeah, it's like old home week, and it's interesting that these two teams, who of course were mates back in the Southwest Conference, have both played a former Southwest Conference foe in Arkansas. And Matthew, Rice did a heck of a lot better than Texas did for 3 quarters. Rice was leading Arkansas 17-7 in the third quarter. Tell us about that game. That was in Fayetteville.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. Me and my co-host on our podcast this week, or last week, he predicted, we're going to have like 2 or 3 national writers tweeting at halftime, what the heck is happening? Rice is leading Arkansas. And he was right. And the formula for Rice, as it's been the past couple years under Mike Bloomgren, is play great defense. And the Rice defense, 5 3-and-outs by the Arkansas offense in the first half. KJ Jefferson, their quarterback, had one big breakaway run at 250 pounds. He's hard to stop, but other than that, it was smooth sailing. So that's been kind of the formula for pulling off. They had the Marshall win last year, undefeated top 15 team on the road, shut them out 20-0, 5 turnovers, and that's kind of like if Rice is going to punch above their weight and beat the Arkansas or try and beat the Texas of worlds, it starts with the defense, and that'll be the story again this week.
Yeah, let's dive into that defense. Talk about it, because it's the strength of the team. Obviously, they only gave up 18.8 points per game last year. You mentioned the shutout of Marshall, very impressive. And this Rice defense has 9 starters back. So tell us about this Rice defense. Who are some of the players to look out for?
I think to start with this Rice defense, you kind of got to go back to last year with injuries. It was pretty crazy. They were down their top 5 cornerbacks on the depth chart going into the Marshall game last season, had their top 3 safeties out for basically the entire year. So they played without their best 8 defensive backs for the majority of last season, and still were able to accomplish what they were. And now almost all of those guys are back. So you're adding that, that returning experience. So, depending on what you call a starter or not, guys that would have started but missed last year, you got guys like George Nyakwal, who is an all-conference caliber guy who's back at safety. Naeem Smith had a pick 6 in that Marshall game. He's a thumper. He's going to come across the middle and lay some wood. And then you got 2 young corners in Sean Fresh and Jordan Dunbar that are redshirt freshmen and held up pretty well against the likes of Treylon Burks and some of those receivers they got over there at Arkansas. So I think it starts with the secondary. They're going to be physical, and they're going to trust their guys. You don't see it as much in college football, but their corners to just play one-on-one on an island and go win. And if they can do that, that opens up a lot more possibilities. So that's the hope. They got Antonio Montero right in there at linebacker in the middle. And he's just going to kind of captain this thing and get everybody set it up in the right direction. So they're going to play hard. That much is for sure.
Well, Arkansas, from what I'm gathering, played a 4-man front against Rice. They switched it up and played an odd front against Texas, and Texas really struggled with it. It looks like Rice bases out of the 4-4-3, but how much odd front do they play?
It's interesting, and I think defensive coordinator Brian Smith does a really good job because they typically operate out of a base with 3 down guys and then an edge, which will be either standing up or have his hand in the dirt, and they'll kind of move that around. And then most everybody in college football today has whatever you call the hybrid position, that is a linebacker and a safety. he has to cover and rush the passer. Rice calls that the Viper, and that has been Treyshawn Chamberlain, who actually got nicked up a little bit in the last game. So hopefully he's ready to go against Texas, but whoever slots in there, that's kind of the key piece to move around on the defense. You'll see that position lined up on the line at one snap, and then the very next play in the deep middle, 15 yards off the back of the field. So moving that around and kind of being able to do a lot of things with similar personnel is really a key to unlocking all of it. So yeah, probably 3 down for the most time, but with the flexibility they have at so many different positions, who that fourth person is will probably change from play to play, and that's one of the things that's helped make the defense so successful.
Yeah, the defense was really good against Arkansas. Obviously, Rice was leading that game 17-7 into the third quarter, and then a couple of late interceptions by Arkansas allowed for short field touchdowns to help Arkansas pull away in that game. And then against Houston, the Rice defense was still pretty good. They'd only given up 17 points into the third quarter. They were down 17-7 against Houston, but then things got away. Was it? I mean, I know the quarterbacks turned it over 3 times in each of those games. Is that what really kind of broke the back of the defense in that Houston game where it ended up being 44-7?
I think there was a part of that. In both of these games, by the time Rice has gotten to the fourth quarter, they've had 3 starters on defense not able to go for whatever reason. So the injury luck has not been favorable. So that's been part of it. And then a part of it was just the Houston quarterback, Clayton Tune. He converted 3 of 4 third downs of 14 yards or longer through the air. And anytime you do that, Rice was able to be fantastic on first and second down. They were getting Houston behind the sticks and they couldn't run the ball. But those third and long plays, and those are backbreakers for a defense. If you do everything right and then you give up an 18-yard completion on third and long, and to do it on three plays in the second half, that was just kind of a real momentum killer. And then Rice ran 5 offensive plays in the third quarter because Houston had a 17-play drive and then an 11-play drive. So those two combined, there was no sense of rhythm. And so once Houston was able to get up 24-7, it was basically a quarter and a half left, and things at that point were getting pretty dire, and the offense started turning over and it just kind of snowballed. So some bad finishes, but like we've seen from the starts, that they're capable.
So, what is the injury situation for the Rice defense right now?
As of right now, Treyshawn Chamberlain's kind of the guy I'm looking at. Uncertain about. He got aircasted in the second quarter against Arkansas and came back after halftime and still led the team in tackles. So that's one tough son of a gun. If he can go, he'll go. Trey Schumann was a guy at defensive end, left the game early, and Myron Morrison at linebacker. So those are the 3 guys that I'm kind of looking out for. The secondary should be, I believe, mostly intact, and they rotate a lot of guys on the defensive line in particular, regardless of who's healthy. So I think you'll see a good mix there. Might be down a couple guys, but at this point, nothing that I think is going to be, deal breaking for their ability to execute.
All right, let's take a quick break here on the Flagship Podcast, talking to Matthew Bartlett of The Roost at theroost.com, expert on Rice football. We'll come back, talk about Mike Bloomgren, the head coach, and the Rice offense, the search for an answer at quarterback. We'll do that next. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we'll just keep rolling on with Matthew. Matthew, let's transition over to the offense. It's obviously been a struggle for the quarterback position. They've had 2 different quarterbacks in each of the first 2 games. Tell us about the struggles, because each quarterback turned it over 3 times through the air. Who do you expect to be the quarterback this week?
Well, we'll start with this week. The quarterback's going to be Luke McCaffrey. If you go by recruiting rankings, the probably highest rated player that has ever taken a snap at Rice University, which has to count for something. What kind of put him behind the eight ball early is I think his decision to come to Rice happened midsummer. So he didn't get the benefit of, a spring ball, or he got thrown in there right at fall camp. And Rice doesn't run, this more of a traditional spread that's pretty common in college football today, where there's a handful of different plays and combinations, and if you can run those five things, you're good. It's a bona fide like pro style offense. And so coming from Nebraska and having to pick up all of those things from go, that was kind of the what held him back from getting out there earlier. So he doesn't have the level of comprehension on this scheme that someone like Wiley Green, who started Rice's first game, does. Who he started games over the past 3 seasons with some of the turnover on the offensive staff. He knows the scheme better than some of the coaches, but it's been the execution problem. He's had turnover issues, and when push comes to shove, is found himself making bad decisions. So he earned, just through his play, his practice, he earned the first start, and I think the staff has seen what they wanted to see. Could he hold up to the pressure? And he didn't. And so now it's full steam ahead on Luke McCaffrey and kind of working that learning curve, and trying to utilize his athletic abilities, especially as a runner, as much as they can.
Yeah, Luke McCaffrey transferred from Nebraska, and as you mentioned, high profile recruit, and he joins offensive coordinator Marquise Tuiasosopo, who used to coach with Steve Sarkisian. Um, but is that what you were alluding to when you said that Wiley Green might know the offense a little better than even Marquise Tuiasosopo?
Well, but not him. I think part of what Tui has brought in is he's kind of brought in a bit of a shift. They've added a lot more motion and a lot more creativity, I think, with his insertion. He is certainly calling things and scheming things up pretty well. It's been the execution piece, I think, that's been more of the issue.
Well, when you look at the who are the guys who are going to make plays, if Rice is going to get this done against Texas, obviously the quarterback Luke McCaffrey's got to take care of the football. But who are the skill guys? Where is the Rice offense strong, and where does it need work?
Well, the two guys I'd point to probably won't play in this game is Bradley Rosner and August Pete. They're starting top two wide receivers. Both got injured against Arkansas and missed the Houston game. Rosner's an all-conference guy, so having him not out there again is painful. But the guy who's kind of picked up the slack is Jordan Myers, who, depending on, I don't know where he is on the depth chart right now. He's was originally listed as a tight end. He switched over and played running back during the spring. They'll line him up wide. He's kind of that jack of all trades, do everything. So you are going to get a lot of Jordan Myers. He's the short yardage goal line back, and he's also kind of like the go-to receiver in a pinch on third downs. Rice's touchdown drive they had against Houston, he was kind of the outlet guy that McCaffrey found scrambling and just got it to him, and he did the rest. So it's going to be a lot of Jordan Myers on the ground. Kailyn Griffin is a guy they really like at running back, former high school quarterback, kind of a dual threat guy who will just run through people. And they're really excited about his prospects. He's had a learning curve. Being thrown to the fire last year was pretty good for him, and getting to experience, being the starter by game 3 of the 5-game Rice season. So he's the other guy, and then you got somebody else is going to have to step up in the receiving game, and that's kind of the question right now for Rice. Jake Bailey was the lone scholarship wide receiver healthy at the end of last season with the injuries they had. Zane Knight got the first start of his career, I believe, last week against Houston outside on the X, and you got Ced Patterson, who was a transfer from New Mexico. They got a lot of options, but they don't really have anybody else beyond Jordan Myers, maybe Jake Bailey, that you really feel confident as being the guy that will.
So Mike Bloomgren comes to Rice from Stanford. He's in his 4th year. Stanford, the lot of 2 tight end, 3 tight end personnel, heavy sets. They want to pound the football. How many tight ends will we see on the field at one time for Rice?
It depends, but I think on a lot of plays, if we're counting Jordan Myers as a tight end, you'll probably see two. They'll run a lot of two tight end sets with Jordan Myers, either as a fullback or an H back, or split out in the slot. And Rice likes to run the football. It's pound the rock, control the clock, and play great defense is the mantra that Bloomgren has gone by since he got here. So they're going to run the football a lot. You mentioned Marquise Tuiasosopo. He's brought in a willingness to kind of expand, and Rice has run 5 wide a couple times this year. And I think especially if you have Luke McCaffrey at quarterback, you can still run the ball with 5 wide if you spread the defense out and let him find his hole. So it's going to be a lot of running from a bunch of different looks. But that's going to be the staple. It's early on, get it to 3rd and short, and then open up the playbook and do whatever you want.
What does Luke McCaffrey is the advantage his legs over Wiley Green? What separates those two?
Unquestionably, the first thing is the rushing ability. As one of the players was telling me in an interview after practice, I said, "What's the difference? Like, they both can execute the offense, but Luke can crib it." And I'm like, I gather that's a good thing to be able to crib it. But he can break off that 60-yard touchdown run, which he did in practice. And you saw, if you look up highlights, what he did against, Ohio State and Penn State and these Big Ten defenses. So he has the talent. But Bloomer himself said he has a howitzer for an arm. He has a big arm. And I think the knock on him as he transferred and ended up Rice is he was kind of labeled as the running back who plays quarterback. And I think I've seen enough of him so far that he does look to throw first, and he is accurate, and especially down the field, and willing to take those shots. So I think his legs separate him, but I think from a just pure quarterback arm strength talent, he's above Wiley in that respect as well.
Pretty talented family, that McCaffrey family, huh?
Yeah, and he just kind of shrugs it off. I think he said the other day, well, it's like, it's all I know. It's normal to me. It's like, okay.
Yeah. His dad, Ed, of course, wide receiver for the Broncos. His older brother, Christian McCaffrey, is Pro Bowler with the Panthers. And so now we're watching Luke's development. Anything else on the offense, Matthew, that stands out before we move to special teams?
I think the big thing, kind of the thing I have circled on my box here, is what happens on 3rd down for Rice, which is pretty elementary to some point. But part of what made it so difficult for the Rice offense against Houston is you had a new inserted wide receiver dropped a pass on the first drive. A 3rd down pass was dropped on the 2nd drive. And then you fast forward a incomplete pass. McCaffrey attempted 1 pass on the 3rd quarter. So the offense basically got 3 or 4 attempts to see McCaffrey on 3rd down, and for whatever reason, it didn't happen. And at that point, you just got thrown behind the sticks. And so that's kind of like the big question mark I have for this offense, because we saw it on the end of the 2nd quarter. They had 6 consecutive plays that ended in either a first down or a touchdown. So they can get going, but when they don't convert on first down, that's kind of the question mark, because Texas can make you pay if you get into 3rd and long, and that's not a game they want to get into.
So on special teams, give us the breakdown for the Owls.
It's going to be Colin Riccatelli handling the field goals, and he's missed 2 kicks, one in each of the first 2 games, which has been just really heartbreaking for an offense that's struggling to get on the board, to get the opportunities there and miss them. He had the unfortunate quadruple doink against Middle Tennessee that went viral last year. But after that miss, I think he converted on like 7 of the next 9 throughout the season or something like that. So he's been pretty reliable for Rice. Gotten off to a bad start, which hasn't helped, but he'll still be the guy at punter. It's going to be Charlie Mendez. Rice has had some of the best special teams play with our specialists over the past couple years. Going back to Jack Fox, who's currently punting with the Detroit Lions in the NFL right now. Mendez has been very good, and expect nothing but the same for him. The big difference maker is probably Sean Fresh, who I mentioned is one of Rice's starting cornerbacks. going back to the Austin roots, did a lot of things in high school up that way, and has kind of been that do-it-all player for Rice. Electric, has had a couple 10, 15-yard punt returns, which, if you have an offense that's struggling, spotting them on a free first down is huge. So look for him to get involved early if he gets an opportunity. He's a guy that can take it all the way.
Obviously, Mike Bloomgren with a veteran team, um, he has high expectations. Talk about the evolution of the program now in year 4 under Mike Bloomgren.
It started with year 0. That was very, very hard. It was a walk-off field goal win over Prairie View, and then 10 straight losses, which was kind of tough. But you saw that year, the depth in the roster was just so depleted. They got to spring ball after his first season, and they had on one occasion to call spring practice early because they didn't have enough bodies with injuries to finish practice. Let alone, I'm talking not just D1 athletes, I'm talking bodies. And so you've seen 3 of Mike Bloomgren's 4 recruiting classes have been in the top 5 of classes that Rice has signed in their program history by rating. So the talent has gone off the charts, and they've started now. It used to be beating Houston across town was a big deal. Their crown jewel from this past recruiting class was DJ Arkansas, who picked Rice over Arkansas. So Rice is beating out SEC teams now. They're beating out Big 12 teams. So the talent is getting there, and it's at a point where you have enough, and now it's time to start winning. There was some grace in year 1 and year 2, and people kind of circled 2020. Okay, that's the year that things are supposed to turn around, and then they played 5 games. They did beat Marshall, which was a huge win that kind of symbolized that things are going in the right direction. But coming now to year 4, Arkansas, Houston, and Texas is a pretty tough non-conference slate. So there's some grace there, but the expectation still, especially with Luke McCaffrey and his talent on board, that this team kind of takes that next step, and really they want to be in a bowl game this year, which starting 0-2 is not out of the question, but it means you do got to start winning soon if you're going to get there.
Well, you got a good look at Houston. Houston's been underperforming under Dana Holgerson since he's gotten there. Of course, he lost De'Ara King to the transfer portal and the Miami Hurricanes. How is Houston doing? Obviously, that was an impressive win over Rice.
Yeah, talking with folks in and around the program over at Houston, they were just as surprised as Rice fans were. I don't think we've seen a performance that good from Clayton Tune at quarterback in maybe 2 years, honestly. And that's one of the things from a fan bases maybe never truly appreciate when games go bad for your team. There's blame to go around, but sometimes the other guy just beats you. And I think Clayton Tune had one of his best performances. He stood in the pocket, and there was a play where a deep safety came from 15 yards out and just ran 25 yards and obliterated him. Still found a way to get the ball out after that. So I think it was a great day from Clayton Tune, and I think that's what Houston is going to need, because they don't really have, especially the skill players that they've had in years past. Marquez Stevenson is not there anymore, so they need somebody else to step up. So if Clayton Tune, it's college football. If you have a great quarterback, you can survive a lot of other problems. The defense is pretty good. The offense has its question marks. If Clayton Tune can be great, then they can probably have a pretty good season. But if he's bad, you saw 4 interceptions against Texas Tech. It's downhill pretty quick.
Yeah, maybe it was just the news that Houston got into the Big 12 that inspired that team. No. Okay, so why don't you give us a forecast of how you see Saturday night playing out in Austin? If you have a score prediction, great. But how do you see that game playing out, Matthew?
It's tricky for me because which Rice team are we going to get? Are we going to get the one that showed up against Arkansas or the one that showed up against Houston? If it's the one that showed up against Houston, this could be an encore of the game a couple years ago where it's 35-3 and the game's over at halftime. If we get the one that showed up against Arkansas and plays great defense and is kind of able to hold, I guess it's Casey Thompson or whatever we see of Hudson Card, contained. I wouldn't be stunned if this is a game that's a one possession game in the second half. And I think, maybe Texas fans, when they hear Rice, might not expect that because they haven't been able to finish it. But you got to look at the Arkansas game, and that was if Rice can play Arkansas better than Texas can play Arkansas, then I don't think it's crazy to say this is a close game in the second half. Texas is going to have the talent edge if they execute and play their game. They should be able to get there, but we saw new coach, things working out the kinks. That's not always the case. So I don't know. I'm optimistic, but we'll have to see which Rice shows up and which Texas shows up.
Right. No, it's a good point. Which Texas team shows up as well? Well, Matthew Bartlett, read him at theroost.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at theroost. Matthew, appreciate it so much. And for Matthew Bartlett, I am Chip Brown of Horns 24/7. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Flagship Podcast. Until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.